On a quiet Tuesday morning in June 2024, a silver Subaru sat alone beside the Siletz River in rural Oregon. Its doors were locked. The keys were missing. The owner, 27-year-old Sarah Holt, was nowhere to be found. To the deputies who arrived first, it looked like the car had simply rolled into place and been abandoned. But nothing about what they found next matched anything resembling a normal disappearance. Just hours earlier, Sarah had texted her roommate, "Back by lunch. I just need some air today." She sounded calm, ordinary, like a woman stepping out for a coffee, not someone about to vanish in broad daylight. And yet, a single trail of footprints led from the Subaru, straight toward the riverbank, only one direction, no return path. At the same time, her phone sent a message from a location 6 miles away, in a place where cell service barely existed. Footprints by the water, a phone ping in the forest, a car locked from the outside. So, what happened between Sarah's last text and the moment she disappeared from this world, without leaving a single trace behind? The day began like any other in the small coastal town of Newport. Oregon mist clinging to rooftops, seagulls circling above Highway 101, and the soft hum of fishing boats pushing out toward deeper waters. Inside a modest 2-bedroom rental home on Alder Street, Sarah Holt moved quietly through her morning routine. Her roommate, Rachel Meyer, remembers the sound of footsteps in the hallway just after 7:30 a.m., muffled and slow, as if Sarah was deep in thought. She didn't look stressed, Rachel would later tell investigators, just distant, like her mind was somewhere else. Sarah grabbed her jacket, clipped her hair up into a loose twist, and slung her work laptop bag over her shoulder. She coordinated travel itineraries for outdoor tours, a remote job she could do from any cafe in town. Her plan was simple: stop for a morning latte, hop on a team call, and return home before lunch. Before heading out, she leaned into Rachel's doorway. "You want chicken tonight?" she asked, half smiling. "Yeah, if you're cooking," Rachel joked. Sarah laughed softly, nodded, and checked the time on her phone. That was the last moment Rachel would ever hear her voice. At 8:14 a.m., Sarah sent her final casual text. "Back by lunch. I just need some air today." There was no argument, no crisis, no sign she intended to leave town or meet anyone. But detectives would later note the phrasing, "I just need some air," spoken by a woman who, 1 week earlier, had hinted that someone had been watching her. Rachel didn't think much of it then. People in their 20s went through moods, phases, bad weeks. She simply assumed Sarah needed a quiet morning to reset. But when noon passed, with no call, no text, and no sound of the Subaru pulling into the driveway, Rachel felt something she couldn't explain. A cold, rising certainty that whatever air Sarah went out searching for that morning, she never found her way back from it. By 8:40 a.m., traffic along the Newport waterfront had already thickened with commuters and delivery trucks. But at Harbor Light Coffee, the baristas remembered something unusual about that morning. Someone didn't show up. Sarah was a familiar face there. Same drink every time, an iced vanilla latte with half the syrup. She came often enough that the staff would start preparing it the moment they saw her Subaru pull into the lot. But on June 18th, the silver Subaru never appeared. At 9:05 a.m., Mia, the barista on shift, glanced at the door and felt a tug of recognition. Not because she saw Sarah, but because she realized she hadn't. She always came early on meeting days, Mia later told detectives, and she always sat by the corner window. That table stayed empty all morning. Police would eventually pull the cafe's security footage. It showed customers coming and going, workers wiping down tables, the espresso machine hissing in steady bursts. But nowhere, not in any frame, was Sarah. Instead, detectives found something far stranger. A traffic camera positioned a few blocks south captured Sarah's Subaru, heading away from the cafe, not toward it. At 8:52 a.m., the vehicle slowed, then turned onto a forest road leading toward the Siletz River, an area she rarely visited, according to friends. There was no sign she hesitated, no sign she was lost, and no indication she was following GPS directions. She didn't go off track by accident, one investigator noted in the case file. Her turn was deliberate. To the public, This moment became the first real fracture in Sarah's timeline, a detour she never mentioned, a change in routine no one could explain, and just minutes after that turn, Sarah Holt slipped out of every camera's view for the rest of the day. By early evening, when Sarah still hadn't responded to calls or messages, her roommate Rachel contacted police. Officers began retracing the imitated digital trail, and by 6:40 p.m., Deputy Mark Ellison of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office located a vehicle matching the description, a silver Subaru Crosstrek, sitting alone on a patch of dirt near the Siletz River. The scene, at first glance, felt strangely peaceful. The river drifted by in slow, green currents. Pine needles carpeted the ground. Aside from the hum of insects, there was nothing to suggest anything violent or frantic had taken place. But the closer Ellison walked, the more the silence felt wrong. The Subaru was parked at a slight angle, as if someone pulled in, corrected too late, then shut off the engine in a hurry. The doors were locked, but the interior looked undisturbed. Sarah's purse sat on the passenger seat, zipped and tidy. Her wallet was inside, cash untouched. No phone, no backpack, no keys. The keys bothered Ellison immediately. If Sarah had walked off alone, she would have either taken them or left them in the car. But the vehicle was locked from the outside, meaning whoever held the keys was no longer on the scene. Deputies circled the area, searching for shoe prints, drag marks, or signs of a struggle. There were none. The ground bore only light, impressions from the car tires and a few scattered pine cones. It looked as though Sarah had simply stepped out and dissolved into the landscape. The strangest part came when Ellison examined the driver's seat. There were no signs of panic, no damage to the ignition, no bent keys dropped in haste. The seat was adjusted exactly to Sarah's height. She had driven here willingly. But why would a woman with a morning meeting, dinner plans, and no history of erratic behavior stop in an isolated pull-off by the river? And, more importantly, where was she now? As daylight thinned into a soft Oregon dusk, search and rescue teams arrived and began sweeping the riverside. The soil near the waterline was damp enough to hold impressions, and it didn't take long before a volunteer called out. They had found footprints. The prints were small, consistent with a woman of Sarah's size, and they led straight from the driver's side door toward the riverbank. Investigators followed them carefully, measuring stride length, depth, and direction. Everything suggested the person was walking normally, not running, not stumbling, not dragging anything. But the first troubling detail came quickly. There was only one set, and they went in one direction only. No returning path, no hesitation, just a clean line of footprints, ending inches before the water's edge. Deputy Ellison crouched beside the final print, frowning at its clarity. If she slipped, he muttered, there'd be scuffs or a slide mark. Something, but there was none. The last step was firm, deliberate, planted with full weight. Divers searched the river into the night, even though currents that day were mild and visibility surprisingly fair. If someone had fallen in, especially so close to the bank, they likely would have resurfaced nearby. But the water gave nothing back. Sarah's roommate Rachel arrived at the scene shortly before midnight, struggling to make sense of the footprints. She wouldn't walk into the river, she said, her voice shaking. Sarah hated cold water. She wouldn't even wade in past her ankles. An SAR coordinator offered a theory. Perhaps Sarah had walked to the edge, looked out at the water, then turned back onto harder ground where prints wouldn't show. But drones with infrared scanned the area. No trail, no heat signatures, no sign of movement. It was as if Sarah had taken those last few steps, and then ceased to exist. The footprints told a story, but one that contradicted everything else investigators knew. While deputies documented the footprint trail, a call came in from a local resident, a fisherman named Howard Howie Briggs, who spent most mornings casting lines along quiet bends of the Siletz River. When officers reached him the next day, Howie hesitated before speaking, rubbing the brim of his weathered cap as though unsure whether what he saw even mattered. "I didn't know it was connected," he said. "Not until I heard on the news someone was missing." At around 9:30 a.m. on June 18th, Howie had been standing on a gravel bar downstream, close enough to see the pull-off, but far enough that details blurred in the morning haze. What caught his attention wasn't noise, but stillness. "There was this woman," he said, just standing there, not moving, facing the water. Officers clicked on their body cameras as he continued. She wasn't fishing. She wasn't walking her dog. She wasn't doing anything, just looking down at the river like she was waiting for something to come up out of it. When they showed him a photo of Sarah, Howie squinted, then shook his head slowly. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Could have been her. Could have been someone else. But the clothes, light jacket, jeans, that part matches." One detail unsettled detectives. Howie said the woman didn't react when a pair of hikers passed near the road. She didn't turn, didn't shift her stance, didn't even glance up. "People look around when they're alone out here," Howie added. "It's instinct." But whoever that woman was, she remained frozen, almost as if she wasn't alone after all, but listening to something no one else could hear. While deputies worked the riverside, digital forensics teams began piecing together Sarah's last known movements through her phone records. And almost immediately, they found something that made every theory collapse in on itself. At 10:02 a.m., nearly an hour after the fisherman believed he saw a woman standing by the river, Sarah's phone sent a short message to a friend. "Can we talk later?" Nothing emotional, nothing alarming, just ordinary, except for where the message originated. The phone pinged from a tower more than 6 miles away, deep inside a stretch of forest where cell reception was notoriously unreliable. Locals often joked you could hike the entire ridge and never get a single bar of service. Yet Sarah's phone had not only connected, but sent a message. Detective Erin Calloway of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office stared at the coordinates on her laptop. "This doesn't fit," she said. "It doesn't fit with anything." If Sarah had walked into the river at 9:30 a.m., she could not have traveled 6 miles inland by 10:02 a.m. If she had left the car intentionally and entered the woods, she would have had to move at an impossible pace, over rough terrain, through thick brush, with no reports of anyone seeing her. And if someone had taken her, investigators argued, why leave the car in plain sight, but carry the phone into a remote area? Even stranger, when search teams reached the coordinates, they found no tire tracks, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing suggesting a person or vehicle had passed through recently. The forest floor was undisturbed, save for deer tracks and fallen needles. FBI analysts were brought in, reviewing tower logs and cross-referencing nearby devices. They confirmed the ping was real, not a glitch. The data wasn't corrupted, but the conclusion raised more questions than answers. For Sarah's phone to be there, it had to have been moved intentionally, by someone who understood exactly where they were going. Late the next morning, a K-9 search team from Benton County arrived to sweep the area around Sarah's Subaru. Their lead dog, Ranger, was a seasoned German Shepherd trained specifically for missing person scent trails. If anyone could pick up where Sarah went, it was him. Handler Tom Alvarez began by presenting Ranger with a scent article. Sarah's fleece jacket, taken from her bedroom. The dog sniffed deeply, ears pricking forward, tail stiffening with recognition. Within seconds, Ranger pulled ahead, guiding the team straight toward the riverside. At first, the trail aligned perfectly with the footprints. Ranger moved with confidence, weaving through pine needles and driftwood until he reached the very edge of the final print. Then his behavior changed. Instead of turning left or right as expected, continuing along the bank or circling back toward the road, Ranger suddenly lifted his head and began scanning the air, pacing in short, uncertain zigzags. His nose dropped, then lifted again. He turned toward the trees, then back toward the water, tail dropping in confusion. "He's losing it," Alvarez murmured, watching the dog's body language. "The scent just stops." K-9 teams practice for scenarios where a scent weakens or splits, but a scent ending abruptly in an open area, without wind, water runoff, or environmental interference, was almost unheard of. Ranger attempted the trail 3 more times. Each attempt led him directly to the same point, the final footprint, and then nowhere. "It's like she vanished mid-stride," Alvarez told detectives. "I've worked dozens of cases. Trails fade, sure, but they don't end clean. Not like this." Searchers expanded the perimeter, expecting Ranger to lock onto a secondary trail further inland. But the forest gave him nothing. No scent, no direction, no trace that Sarah Holt had ever taken a single step beyond that riverbank. For investigators, the search along the river and surrounding forest made one thing clear. Sarah didn't simply wander off. Something had led her, or driven her, to that remote spot. But the real shift in the investigation came when detectives sat down with Sarah's mother, Linda Holt, a quiet woman who carried a folder of her daughter's childhood photos to every interview. She hesitated at first, unsure whether what she was about to reveal mattered. Then she unfolded a page containing a handwritten note Sarah left on the kitchen counter a week before disappearing. The note wasn't a goodbye letter. It wasn't emotional. It was just one sentence. "Do you ever feel like someone's walking a few steps behind you?" Linda admitted she didn't think much of it at the time. Sarah had always been introspective, sometimes poetic, even in casual conversation. But then Rachel, the roommate, stepped forward with her own concerns. "She'd been acting different," Rachel said, checking the blinds, locking the door twice, asking if I noticed anyone parked on our street. Rachel recalled an incident from 3 nights before the disappearance. Sarah had come home pale, breath unsteady, saying a dark-colored SUV had followed her from the grocery store to the turn onto Alder Street. "I asked if she wanted to call the police," Rachel said. She said no. She didn't want to sound paranoid. But the SUV wasn't the only strange thing. Detectives also recovered 3 emails in Sarah's inbox from an address with no name, just a string of numbers. The subject lines were empty. The body text contained a single sentence each. "We need to talk. I saw you again today. Why are you ignoring me?" The emails came from an untraceable IP, bouncing through a foreign server. Cyber forensics couldn't confirm whether they were spam, a prank, or something more intentional. Friends, said Sarah, brushed them off as weird internet stuff. But her search history showed something else. How to know if you're being followed. Unmarked SUVs. Oregon. A pattern was forming. One, Sarah never fully voiced. One investigators could no longer ignore. Because whatever fear lived inside her during that final week, it might have walked with her all the way to the Siletz River. As days passed, with no breaks in the search, the quiet coastal community of Newport began to fracture under the weight of speculation. In a town where everyone knew someone who knew Sarah, theories spread fast, each one fueled by the contradictions surrounding her disappearance. The first group believed the simplest explanation. Sarah walked away, intentionally. They pointed to her note about feeling followed, the late-night anxiety, the emails. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she planned to disappear on her own terms. But detectives quickly countered this idea. Sarah left behind her wallet, her medications, and her laptop. People who run don't leave behind the tools they need to survive. The second group leaned toward an accidental drowning, with footprints ending at the water's edge. The theory seemed obvious on the surface, but search divers had already swept every feasible section of the river. Visibility was high, currents were low, nothing turned up. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, and the phone ping 6 miles inland made this theory nearly impossible. Then there was the third group, the one investigators reluctantly began taking more seriously. Foul play. Someone else. Someone who might have been watching her. Locals recalled the dark SUV Rachel mentioned. Rangers' scent trail stopping abruptly. The missing keys. The untraceable emails. None of these pointed to an accident or a voluntary disappearance. They pointed toward another person being present. But even within this theory, the town splintered again. Was it a stranger passing through? Someone she knew but didn't trust? Or someone who'd been circling her life quietly, unnoticed, for longer than anyone realized? At a community meeting, a retired police chief summarized what everyone felt. People don't just vanish like this, he said. Not without help, and not without a shadow trailing them. A shadow the town could sense, but still couldn't name. While the town debated theories, investigators shifted their focus to something far more concrete. The digital breadcrumbs left behind on Sarah's phone and vehicle systems. Modern cars, especially newer Subaru models, store logs of GPS activations, ignition cycles, and even steering adjustments. When detectives accessed these records, they expected a simple route, the direct drive from her home toward the cafe. Instead, they uncovered a pattern that tightened the case and deepened the mystery. According to the logs, Sarah changed her route 3 separate times between 8:25 and 8:50 a.m. The first change occurred near a residential intersection she drove every week. The car veered off its usual path, taking a side street that added several minutes to her trip. The second deviation happened near the downtown district, where she bypassed turnoffs leading toward the cafe, despite being within 1 block of her usual stop. But the third change was the most disturbing. At 8:52 a.m., just seconds before the traffic camera recorded her turning toward the Siletz River access road, the vehicle abruptly slowed. Steering input showed a moment of hesitation left, then right before she committed to the turn that would take her away from town and into the forested stretch where her car would later be found. Detective Erin Calloway stared at the driving data, tapping a pen against her notebook. "This isn't someone who got lost," she said. "This is someone who kept trying to avoid something, or someone." Witness canvassing soon added weight to her theory. 2 drivers reported seeing a dark SUV matching the one Sarah mentioned to Rachel, traveling the same direction as her that morning. Neither driver remembered seeing it follow her closely, but both noticed it kept appearing at different intersections along her route. A pattern of presence, a pattern of avoidance. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for investigators to consider a chilling possibility. Sarah hadn't simply decided to drive toward the river. Something had pushed her there. For the next 2 weeks, the Siletz River corridor transformed from a quiet strip of wilderness into the center of one of the largest search operations Lincoln County had seen in years. Helicopters traced grid patterns above the tree line. Volunteers in bright vests combed through blackberry thickets. Drones scanned for heat signatures long after sunset. But the forest remained silent, offering no hints, no movement, no answers. On the 3rd day, search teams expanded their perimeter 3 additional miles in every direction. The terrain was harsh, thick underbrush, steep ravines, and stretches of moss-covered ground that swallowed footprints within minutes. Despite the difficulties, teams found nothing. No torn clothing, no phone, no hair, not even a scrap of paper. It was as if the woods were actively erasing any trace of her. Retired game warden Pete Salazar, who volunteered in the search, described it best. "You expect nature to hide things, but not everything. Not like this. There should have been something." Cadaver dogs were brought in next, flown in from Portland, trained to locate remains, even in deep brush. They swept both sides of the river, multiple passes over several days. Each time, handlers reported the same thing: no alerts, no partial hits, nothing for the dogs to lock onto. Detectives also monitored the river flow, hoping rising water levels might reveal new clues. But even after storms swelled the currents, the search yielded no debris, no personal belongings, no indication that Sarah had entered the water at all. Meanwhile, the forest seemed to absorb the searchers' frustration. The longer the operation continued, the more oppressive the silence felt, as if the trees were holding a secret they refused to surrender. By day 14, the sheriff's office had to face a bitter truth. Every conventional avenue water, land, sky, scent had been exhausted, and yet the question remained exactly where it started. If Sarah didn't drown, didn't run, and didn't leave the area on foot, then where was she? With no physical evidence emerging from the river or the forest, investigators turned to the last solid piece of Sarah's timeline, the traffic camera footage that captured her Subaru at 8:52 a.m. It was a single, 6-second clip, silent, grainy, and easily overlooked. But for detectives, it became the most valuable window into her final known moment. The camera, mounted above a highway intersection, showed the Subaru approaching from the south. At first, everything looked routine, steady speed, centered in the lane, nothing erratic. But as the car neared the turnoff to the forest road, something subtle happened. Sarah's brake lights flickered. Not a full stop, not even a hard press, just a quick hesitation, as though she was debating whether to continue straight toward town or to turn toward the remote river access. Then came the steering movement. The wheel nudged left, corrected right, then finally committed to the turn. Detective Calloway replayed those 6 seconds more than 100 times. "This wasn't indecision," she said. "It looked like someone checking a mirror, like she was watching something behind her before deciding." When investigators enhanced the footage, they noticed another detail. Just before Sarah's Subaru exited the frame, a dark-colored SUV appeared in the distance, Too far to identify, but close enough to be moving along the same route. The SUV wasn't speeding, wasn't tailgating, but it was there, and no one could determine whether it was coincidence or connection. More unsettling was Sarah's posture behind the wheel. Even through the grainy footage, her shoulders appeared tense, her gaze fixed upward, not toward the road ahead, but toward her rearview mirror. For a brief second, she lifted her hand, as if adjusting it. A tiny moment, a nearly invisible gesture, but one that suggested she wasn't just driving, she was checking who might be following her. That was the last confirmed image of Sarah Holt alive. After that, the world swallowed her trail, her footsteps at the river, her scent in the air, her phone 6 miles inland, all disconnected pieces of a story no one could solve. A story, waiting for the one clue, the one witness, the one voice still missing. Somewhere between that silent riverbank, the forest trail that never existed, and the last flicker of brake lights on a traffic camera, the truth about what happened to Sarah Holt still waits in the shadows. Cases like hers don't fade because people stop caring. They fade when the voices that remember them grow quiet. And Sarah deserves better than silence. If stories like hers matter to you, if you believe every missing person deserves to be searched for, spoken about, and never forgotten, then your support truly makes a difference. Please like this video so it reaches more people. Please subscribe to Vanished in America Story so we can continue telling the stories of the missing stories that still need light, still need witnesses, still need someone listening. And if you know something, anything, that could help bring answers to Sarah's family, share her story, keep her name alive. Because the truth doesn't disappear, it just waits for someone to finally see it.